how to become a front-end developer in the UK. My name is Isaac. I am a previous CTO of a funded startup and I run the checkout team at Pretty Little Thing. Today I am going to be discussing how you can become a front-end developer in the UK. I did a video previously comparing the differences between three of the main roles that you can get into as a developer, front-end being one of them. In this video I will be explaining what front-end is, who specifically this is for, and then the methods of getting into it in terms of picking an architecture and then methods of learning. So what is front-end development? Front-end essentially is just everything that a user can see. Every time you are on your phone or on your laptop, you log into something like Twitter, you can see all the tweets, you can see your profile pictures, everything like that. Everything you can visually interact with is the front end. The back end is like the server that sends all the information. So when you log in, your front end takes the form, your email, blah, 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 it sends it off to the back end checks that it's correct, and if it is, it sends all the information about your profile, such as your tweet, your profile picture, your username. The front end is the display. So front end, visual, back end logic. Who is this for? This is for anyone in the UK with a laptop. As long as you have the work ethic to be consistent and the time to learn, this is for everyone. Out of all the roles, why front end? I do have a video explaining this in a little bit more depth, but just as an overview, the salary doesn't cap out for quite a while. The starting salary is quite good and it's one of the fastest ones to get into. Summary complete. How do you actually get started getting into the front end role? Front end technology, and to be fair, most technology roles in general actually are almost always contained in a stack, and a stack is more or less a set of tools or frameworks that are used. So if you think of an RPG game where you have like a mage or a ranger, they have different sort of weapons they can use based on their build. Imagine companies like this. Companies sort of lock themselves into specific architectures, and as such there's only certain frameworks they can use. When they hire for front-end developers, they very specifically hire for these frameworks that they already utilize. As such, when getting into this role, one of the most important things is actually understanding which frameworks you want to specifically learn. You can do this by finding companies that you like and looking at what stack they use, and then drilling down and really learning that. I know it might sound a little bit confusing, but there's only really two frameworks you need to be aware of, which is React and Angular. They are the dominant ones at the time of this video. I doubt it's going to change too much in the next year or so, but you only need to learn one of those, and to be honest, the difference between them is not massive. I'm a bit biased because I learned React, but I think React is a little bit more accessible in terms of jobs. I see more of them. However, I know people that do Angular and it's the very same thing. There's no real difference. It's like if a company decides to use Microsoft Office or Google Docs. It really doesn't make too much of a difference. You just need to specialize in one so that you can get a job in that role. You just have to pick a side. Doesn't really matter which one you pick, but you do have to pick and you have to be consistent. Now that I've been quite clear in terms of you need to narrow down what you're doing by stack and then pick a stack. Doesn't need to be the best. It just needs to be consistent so that you can pigeonhole yourself to a specific job type. I'm going to explain the overall architecture of front-end technologies and the tools you subsequently need in your tool belt. So there's 4 different steps to this. There is D.O.M management, which is basically everything that you could see is more or less a document. We'll get to that. D.O.M management packages, so the layer of abstraction on top which actually handles this. So React and Angular are examples of this. We'll get to it. State management, which is essentially the memory that the front end has. So we will get into this later, but it's heavily to do with caching and making sure that you send less requests to the backend for information. And then finally there is package management, which is how you bundle pre-existing code into your project to reuse. So the D.O.M, which is an acronym, document object model, is HTML and CSS JavaScript. So, well, it's kind of just HTML, CSS. When you look at a website, your browser actually represents this as a document. So every time you see a title, text, they are individual segments of a document. The document is the HTML file itself. CSS is a styling tool, which stands for cascading style sheets. It stands on top of this document. This handles the styling, the spacing, the coloring, everything to do with how it actually looks. The browser interprets this. And then there is JavaScript, which is basically a code that lets you manipulate the D.O.M. A lot of acronyms, kind of went over that quickly, but fundamentally the only thing you really need to understand is that HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are the main emphasis of what build up a page when you're looking at a website, and everything else kind of works on top of it. That is the foundational bottom blocks. As such, you do need to understand how this works, but this is very basic. If you want any how to build a website tutorial, it will show you these things and you kind of go to speed with them quite quickly. The next stage is document management packages. So this is your Reacts, this is your Angulars. Packages are essentially pre-existing code which you can utilize for your use case. All modern applications are built with these, and essentially the way I want you to think about this is as a layer of abstraction above the building blocks. So if you wanted to make a button in HTML, you'd have to put HTML button, you'd have to in CSS say, oh, I want it to be this size. And in JavaScript, you maybe have a listener and say, oh, when this is pressed, I want it to do this. The whole point of this step above with these DOM management packages is you can just go import button from the pre-existing code they have, and what it will do is it will convert to HTML and CSS under the hood. You don't even need to see it, but that's how it'll look when you have the website. The more advanced these things have gotten, they also have entire ecosystems in terms of how you manage the structure of their, like a React project will be structured in a certain way. They lean specific ways on like how you manage memory on the front end as well, which we'll get to in the next step, state management. But it's very important that you understand the structure of the package that you're using, because it's very common that's the only thing that's really touched. And underlying the under the hood HTML, CSS stuff, it's kind of left alone. And that's really what modern front end development is all about. The next step, we have state management, which is to a degree determined by the DOM management package. So this can involve things that actually make external requests to servers, accessing APIs. APIs are basically like the back end. It's how you would request assets. So if you log in, you hit an API, it sends back the details. State management is essentially how you manage this data within your website. Imagine every time you open the Twitter website, it needed to request all your information. So your username, your tweet, your profile picture, things would be very slow to load. This is often also why when you first log in, it's a lot slower than subsequent uses of a page. It's because when it downloads everything from the back end, there's a caching or state management system which will save it on your laptop or phone or whatever you're using. That way, every time you go through the pages, instead of having to make a request to the server, it already has it available and it goes, oh, I'll just use it. And that's much faster than actually doing a network request. It's the optimization and the experience that the user gets so much faster, much easier to use. Also, doing less network requests, it's cheaper on the servers. I think a lot of people focus on the DOM management packages. I can't remember what the stat is. I believe it's if a website takes longer than a second to load, 80% of traffic traditionally drops off. So if you think about how important it is to actually cache things, like people are not patient, we have things to do. If your website doesn't load quickly or is being slow navigating through pages, you will lose traffic, and that affects the bottom line. So very important that this is understood and used properly. Frameworks and tools that you might be using for this, Redux is a really popular one, which is kind of its own tool of how you store information on the browser and how that can plug into whatever package management you're using for the DOM. I will put a link in the description. It is a very important step and not one to be missed. And then finally, we have package management. So as I said about all these other steps after the DOM management packages and state management packages, which are pre-existing code. This step is essentially something you use to compile pre-existing code and keep it consistent and be able to work with multiple people on the same project. NPM stands for Node Package Manager, and Node is a JavaScript-based language which works from terminal, or it is basically something that doesn't need to run on the browser, and people do actually use it for server development these days. If you've ever seen it, it's that matrixy looking thing on people's laptops where you can download packages into your project. If you wanted to use React, it doesn't necessarily come out of the box. What you have to do is you have to download it on NPM and include it in your project. There are tools which make this step a lot easier, but then for subsequent things like Redux, you basically have to use NPM to install it, and then you can use it in your package. It quite literally downloads packaged files to your laptop which contain the code which you can then piggyback off of. When you get a little bit further down the line as well, there's this thing called Webpack, which helps you bundle your front-end website. So as I said, there's a bunch of different code that you will import. Projects can get quite big in terms of code, and some of it you're not always using. When you're locally working on your website, it works because it's on your laptop and you can run it from your laptop. But if you think about it, when you go on Twitter, it's not necessarily running from your laptop. There's another machine somewhere which hosts this code, which it then sends over to you. Your website needs to live somewhere. You need to transfer it somewhere else for it to work. Using something like Webpack can actually trim a lot of the fat on your project so that when you store it, it's cheaper to host, it's faster to retrieve, which is also part of the load time, and basically just easier to host and manage. And that one's a little bit more complicated. I'd say that comes towards the end of the journey, but that's important. Finally, you also have GitHub, which is more or less a project manager for your code project. This lets you save it online. This lets you send it to other people. This lets multiple people work on it at the same time. And if there's conflicting code, it can kind of reconcile itself. So it's like a tool suite for collaboration, essentially. But it's got a lot of other uses, and it's very important to know. Okay, so conclusion of the architecture section. These are basically the 4 categories of things that you need to be able to learn to successfully land a front-end role. It's not too important which ones you land as long as they're consistent. So for example, state management tools need to fit into the ecosystem of whatever package manager you're using. Other than that, it really doesn't matter what you pick. I want to be very clear. As long as you pick one of the main ones, which is React and Angular, and everything else feeds off of that, you will be fine. They are very popular and there are jobs available for them. If you want my personal advice, I would use React because I think jobs are more accessible. I may be slightly biased because it's the one I use, but there are a ton of resources out there to actually help you get onboarded and started, and I think it's a great entry into the market. Okay, so now I've explained what front end is, what you actually need to learn to understand it. The next step, how do you actually go about learning that? There's three methods that I really wanted to talk about, which is courses, solo learning, and upskilling. Courses do cost money, which is obviously negative. However, they're guided, which is actually a massive benefit. So you're not overwhelmed of like, oh, I don't know what to pick. They kind of pigeonhole you already. And very often course providers will have either their own recruitment wing or connections with companies to get you a job afterwards. So it does cost a little bit more, but I think it can be far more efficient in the long run, so long as you pick a decent company. As well as that, there's also alumni to work with, and you actually normally have like a course provider or someone on hand where you can ask them questions about the role or the job, and it makes the learning process a lot easier. I'd recommend it personally. I will put a link below to potential courses you can use. My personal bet would be Love Circular. The other ones look great, if I'm honest. I just haven't actually gone through them. Love Circular, however, I was actually part of the founding team that built it, and it's ran by one of my good friends at the moment that I trust very much. They also have an excellent refund policy, which is if you've not got a job within 6 months, you get your money back, so you don't really lose anything. Well worth checking out. The links will be below. So courses, a bit expensive, don't want to pay for that, fine. Next, you have solo learning, which is obviously cheaper because you don't pay. With this, you get to be more specific. However, I actually think that can be bad because it's kind of paralysis by analysis. There's so many options and it's very difficult to, even if you think you're on the right track, it's very easy to get derailed after a bit because you learn new information and frankly, you haven't seen enough to be able to catalog and understand this information, and you will just get sidetracked. Instead of just narrowing down, you might pick and choose from different areas and combine them, and you kind of like a Frankenstein of experience. And although it's not wasted experience, it's not optimized for a job role, so it will actually take you longer should you want to get placed. Portfolio building won't necessarily be automatic as well, so some of the courses kind of like build a portfolio into it, and when you're done you can say you've been through a course. If you do it on your own, you have to also think like when you do actually have these skills and you go to an employer, how are you showing them? Not to say it can't be done. If you build a portfolio deliberately as you're upskilling and learning, excellent. If you can, even if you can work for free for people, do some projects. You can say it's a paid project when you go for your CV and you can show them what you've done. But that is the caveat. So it can go better for you, it can go faster. However, there is more responsibility on you and therefore more option for error or success. Whatever your risk appetite is. I personally was self-taught, but I started really young. So I think I started around like 14 where, I'm at school, I had no real responsibility and I wasn't even doing it to get a job. I was just kind of like bored and had the internet. Everyone's path is going to be different. To do it again, I probably would do a course because it's quicker, but like I said, it's completely down to risk appetite. And if you have people in your life who are very much in the industry that can give you the advice you need, you might be able to just do it solo and do it cheaper. Third, upskilling. This sort of isn't a method, it's kind of like an opportunity or a position. But if you're already in a company that has a great tech field, you can actually ask the hiring manager or the head of the department, look, I'm interested in getting into this. What do I need to know? And they will tell you specifically what to learn. And because you've already gone into the company, they've done the vibe check. There's a lot of things that they don't have to do, and the transition over might be quite easy. Even if you can ask like, look, can I pick up some work like for free after work or something like that? I know it sounds a bit lame, but if you can get that experience under your belt, they like you and they take you on, that could be a start. If you move over, you probably won't get paid for the change, but guess what? You'll have hands-on experience. So if you can, in a shorter time frame, actually say on your CV, oh, I worked here, did this, way better for you than earning more money in the long run. So yeah, if you're already in a role that does it like QA, IT support, or even you're just in a company that has a strong IT team, it's a lot easier to cross-skill and upscale. Buy books, get courses, whatever you need to do to learn, maybe even get certification in certain areas, but it's a great starting point. Cool, now I've explained all that, I would just like to go over some base expectations for this role. It is not instant. I know people say, oh, learn to code in 3 months and blah, 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 but it's not really realistic for how, if you think about how much people are paying you, like they're not gonna pay someone that can, it takes longer than 3 months to learn, frankly. It can be done 6 to 12, especially like if you have a course that's a little bit more guided, but it does take work and consistency. The more you specialize, the faster it will be to get where you want to go, and you can then cross skill layers. So that's the advice I would give. I wasn't particularly specialized when I started, but I didn't know what I was doing. If I could give the advice, I would say, pick a very specific technology. As I said, courses are great for this now because they kind of do all that thought work and guidance for you, so you can just show up and do the work. Once you're there, it's a lot easier to cross-skill. Remember, you only need to land one job to be in the industry. As soon as you get one job under your belt, it is far easier to go to other places and get other jobs. And for every job you change, like let's say after a year and a half, you will actually get paid more. So get experience under your belt. Even if you don't like the pay at the moment, I promise you it will pay dividends later on in your career. Whew. Okay, so Conclusion, I would like to think from this you have a more realistic understanding of what it takes. The steps are a little bit more outlined. I know I didn't go into depth in terms of how to learn, but that itself is an expansive 6 to 12 month process. So I hope this at least gives you the understanding of what next steps to take. As I said, the stack you pick really isn't that important. I don't want people to get hold up on like, oh, I have to pick the right thing, because fundamentally the ones that I list that are the very popular ones, they're so dominant it really doesn't matter. It kind of is just one or the other. It's apples or oranges. And guess what? These skills are also very easy to cross skill. So once you have one, you can get the other. The reason I suggest pigeonholing into one is it's faster to get a job and faster to get into the role. I'd like to think you now know how to make a decision. If you don't, and there's still something I haven't answered or covered, feel free to message me. It would be preferable if you make a comment so that if I answer it, everyone with the same question can actually see the answer. But if needed, I'm happy to help. And I want to close this out by saying this is very, very possible to do. People do it all the time. I think a lot of people glamorize the roles a lot, but fundamentally they are just companies and they are just roles. You just need to learn the process to get into it. This is just my experience, but hopefully this is useful. If you know someone that's trying to get into front end, please send them this video so they can make a more informed decision. Thanks, guys.